But after a while, the Philistines returned and raided the valley again. And once again, David asked God what to do. "Do not attack them straight on," God replied. "Instead, circle around behind and attack them near the poplar trees. When you hear a sound like marching feet in the tops of the poplar trees, go out and attack. That will be the signal that God is moving ahead of you to strike down the Philistine army." We've read in other verses and passages and chapters even about, actual armies of God, like unseen angelic armies being present in certain situations. I almost wonder if this thing about God moving ahead of you, as it says here, was actually supposed to be referring to that, angelic army. At the very least, it's something about the presence of God that would be active and moving in the situation before any of the fighting even started. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alrighty. So now we're looking at 1 Chronicles 14. Last chapter talked about David moving the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, at least, part of that process. It had wound up captured, but then returned, but not really returned to the best of places in, the kingdom of Israel. So David's like, hey, this shouldn't just be left here on the outskirts. Let's bring it to the capital. Much more defensible. But then some stuff happens along the way. In any case, this is all still kind of recapping things for the purpose of informing the Babylonian exiles, who are centuries removed from most of this. Just, all of the stuff in 1st and 2nd Kings, at least, is between this and the audience who is now reading, or probably mostly hearing about it. So, point is to recap prior events to let them know, hey, here's how we ended up in exile, seemingly abandoned, but not really, seemingly abandoned by our God. And then, once they know, maybe they can do better. So, still recapping events from David's life and time as king. Let's see what else we get into in chapter 14 here. It starts off saying then, so I guess it's definitely noting that it's after the whole bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem effort. So, then King Hiram, if I can talk. Then King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David, along with cedar, timber, and stonemasons and carpenters to build him a palace. And David realized that the Lord had confirmed him as king over Israel, and had greatly blessed his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. Then David married more wives in Jerusalem, and they had more sons and daughters. These are the names of David's sons who were born in Jerusalem: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Elpalet, Noga, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. So, still, little bits and pieces of genealogy getting worked in here, too. Which can serve as a connecting point to the listening exiles of Babylon, saying, oh, hey, I'm descended from that person. This relates to me and my history and how I got in this mess. Okay, so David sees some success, has more sons, thus further expanding his lineage. There were definitely other sons, or maybe I shouldn't say definitely like I know for sure, but I'm pretty sure there were other sons born to him beforehand and while he was living in other places. Note there at Eliada, Hebrew has Eliada variant spelling. Compare 3:8 and parallel text at 2 Samuel 5:16. Either way, referring to the same person as back in 2 Samuel 5:16, I would imagine. As we've seen in previous chapters, sometimes names change for whatever reason. Or sometimes it's just like there might be different ways of pronouncing something or spelling it based on the pronunciation or whatever. Which, that's a thing I hadn't even really gotten into much depth on with, things being more oral than written by far back in that time. People's names were probably more so known by the pronunciations rather than the spellings. So having a variation on the spelling was a lot more likely if you had different people trying to spell out the same name. So, okay. David is successful, has more wives, and bears more sons. Okay. Politically Christian says, people's names were also known by their meanings more than anything, such as Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter. Yeah, then there is that, which... Then there's full-on name changes like that. Above and beyond just, variant spellings of the same name. In any case, don't be too worked up over that and being like, wait, this is inconsistent. The Bible's wrong. There's no way. Because it's saying a different thing here no. It's just a different... It was a different language. It's still referring to the same person. Alright, the events in the history didn't suddenly change to have a different person involved than what it mentioned before. Anywho, okay, on to verse 8. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over all Israel, they mobilized all their forces to capture him. But David was told they were coming, so he marched out to meet them. The Philistines arrived and made a raid in the valley of Rephaim. So David asked God, "Should I go out to fight the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me?" The Lord replied, "Yes, go ahead. I will hand them over to you." So David and his troops went up to Baal Perazim and defeated the Philistines there. "God did it," David exclaimed. "He used me to burst through my enemies like a raging flood." So they named that place Baal Perazim, which means the Lord who bursts through. The Philistines had abandoned their gods there. So David gave orders to burn them. When it says abandon their gods there, I assume it means like the idols and things that represent those gods. So, the Philistines, who were like kind of number one rivals at that time with Israel, were, not happy about the idea of David being king. They had seen and heard of what all he had done before and were like, oh geez, if this guy's king, we're doomed. So they put their best effort into trying to capture him, and it's ultimately unsuccessful. and all these idols and things that get left behind, David decides to burn them, thus destroying them, presumably, because he doesn't want those things in Israel. That's only gonna cause problems. Because, literally says in the Ten Commandments to have no other gods before the Lord. So then, it also mentions that place being called Baal Perazim because of the battle that happened there and the success that David and his troops saw against the Philistines. And then we move on to verse 13. But after a while, the Philistines returned and raided the valley again. And once again, David asked God what to do. "Do not attack them straight on," God replied. "Instead, circle around behind and attack them near the poplar trees. When you hear a sound like marching feet in the tops of the poplar trees, go out and attack. That will be the signal that God is moving ahead of you to strike down the Philistine army." So David did what God commanded, and they struck down the Philistine army all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. So David's fame spread everywhere, and the Lord caused all the nations to fear David, thus adding further to his success overall as king. Probably word spread from the Philistines and the other surrounding people of all this military success that David was having, and they were like, okay, we better not mess with this dude. So the Philistines tried to attack again. Now, note there at poplar trees. Could be aspen or balsam. Also in 14:15, where it says poplar trees there. The exact identification of this tree is uncertain, which is why it's like, well, there's multiple kinds of trees it could possibly be. And I would imagine translators look at, original Hebrew descriptions or whatever, as well as kind of getting a sense of, all right, what kind of trees might be in that area. Or at least might have been in that area at that time, as best as they would understand it. Also, I just had a thought this time around, especially regarding this section here that's talking about, God moving ahead to strike down the Philistine army. Like, we've read in other verses and passages and chapters even about, actual armies of God, like unseen angelic armies being present in certain situations. And like, one person will be able to see them, but another person can't. Or like, suddenly, one person says a thing to another and then they see. But in any case, like, I almost wonder if this thing about God moving ahead of you, as it says here, was actually supposed to be referring to that, like, angelic army. At the very least, it's something about the presence of God that would be active and moving in the situation before any of the fighting even started. And the probably loud rustling of a sort, within the poplar trees was supposed to be the signal that, alright, God's on the move here, go. Because, why not join in and work together with God's efforts rather than trying to, like, be out of sync or operate at a different time? No. You want to be part of God's effort, not separate from it. So, yeah. Overall, more successes for David as king. And again, this is history stuff that's supposed to like set the scene and the tone for the audience who would be hearing this as exiles in Babylon, to know their history so they don't repeat it, and then maybe they can have a hand in making their situation better. But anyway, that is all I've got for 1 Chronicles 14. Alright, so we got another short-ish chapter on King David and some of the stuff that he did, particularly a bit of, military victories against the Philistines noted in this chapter, and then how that got him even more of a name in the surrounding areas, which in a way made him an even bigger part of the history of God's people because of just how much his influence spread. Maybe not directly over a bunch of other people, but at least indirectly, in that, like, they really didn't want to mess with him. But they also might have knew that, that God was on his side as a result of that. And a little bit of genealogy sprinkled in there, too, to help the Babylonian exiles make possible other connecting points with all this history. But anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description for links to social media pages, Discord server, supporter page, all that good stuff. And down below that, leave your thoughts and questions down in the comments section. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. Whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.